Welcome to this edition of the YAHOWAH blog. We're here in our library studio. It is a Wednesday afternoon, the 3rd of September, 2025. And we're going to continue with our series, affectionately known as the Antichrist. I always have to preface that by saying there actually was no Christ. And so technically there cannot be an Antichrist. And we're not referencing the book of Revelation because, I have disproven the entirety of the Christian New Testament. But there is an individual who I have dubbed the Towrahless one. He is the affront to Dode in the last days. He is the one who is the actual Messiah, Son of God, and our Savior. And therefore, the Christian term is the one that will garner the most attention in this regard because we have identified this man's name. He is Donald Trump. And he is currently demon-possessed, and we know exactly what he's going to do, when he's going to do it, how he will do so, and how the next 8 years are going to play out. It's one of the reasons why when there was so much uproar over the prior weekend that Donald Trump was dead, and I didn't take the bait because somehow, some way, Satan is committed to keeping that man alive so that he can wring every evil drop of darkness out of him between now and the time that he will actually die. Well, he's actually going to die. Donald Trump and the one possessing him, Hasatan, the adversary, is going to be sent off to Sheol, where no one ever dies. It is a place of everlasting confinement, and that is where he is headed. And that's going to occur on the 24th of September, 2033, should you want to be there and witness the occasion. Now, the testimony we're covering happens to be in the book of Daniel. So it is a prophetic text delivered not by Daniel. Daniel didn't serve as a prophet, but there were 3 prophets that revealed information to him. Foremost of them was David. He is described here as Gabriel. God is very clear. The Gabor is Dode. He is the most courageous and capable of men. And Gabriel means the most competent and courageous man of God. And therefore, we're speaking of Dode, David, the Messiah, and Son of God when we're addressing Gabriel, which is, of course, very interesting because the passage that the Christians must, they don't ever cite it, but they must use to claim that there is a Messiah coming in the future is Daniel 9. And in that chapter, the person who is revealing the prophecy is actually the Messiah who is going to arrive to accomplish the fulfillment of Chag Matzah. And so it actually impugns the credibility of Christianity rather than establishing it. So where we are now is we're dealing with the preamble to Daniel 9, which should be Daniel 8. And he has announced that there are 2 individuals who have joined him. One of those individuals he has designated as Yada, and the other is Gabriel. So these are the 2 key players in the end. And so they have one come back in time, one going forward in time to make this revelation known to Daniel. And he to us, and what I'm sharing with you, I'm positive is the first time that this prophecy has ever been understood. He said, "Pay close attention to me." And this is now Gabriel, Dode, speaking to Daniel. "Yada will make this known to you so that it can be understood." Person speaking to you is Yada. You'll find in all of the books that I have written, they're under the name Yada Yahowah. That means to know Yahweh. It is a verb in Hebrew. It is used as a verb here. It designates the work that Yahweh and I are doing together to reintroduce the world to the truth about this fellow, Gabriel, who is Dode, our actual king, our Messiah, our Savior, and the very Son of God, the one that was ripped off to create the myth of Jesus Christ. And so it is Dode here now that is asking me to make this known so that you can understand it. And now you're witnessing the fulfillment of that prophecy as the final witness. And that is also a designation of the role that I've been asked to play. There are two final witnesses. I am one, Yada, and the other is Elia, known as Elijah, but there is no J in Hebrew. And the name is clearly El, which is the Hebrew word for God, Yah, which is Yahweh's name. So it's Elia. It means Yahweh is God. And he and I are the two final witnesses that are going to appear. We are arriving on Passover in 2030. We'll be communicating from the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock and the Osca Mosque will be obliterated. And Yahweh is going to restore the tent of the restoring witness, which will be our home during that time. And it's going to be a series of miraculous events during that last 3.5 years. But it is on Passover, April 18th in 2030 that we will arrive. This is 33 days after Donald Trump as the Towrahless one, who is going to arrive in Jerusalem on January 29th. On the Ides of March 15th of 2030, he is going to make the declarations of his position relative to rescheduling Yahweh's 7 Moed Mikre, and also he is going to declare that he is a God. So that puts you in the frame of reference here. You know who is talking about whom. And should you be listening, and this is one of the first times that you have heard this program and you're wondering why someone would make these claims, because so many people over time have claimed to be a Messiah, and I'm not, absolutely not. I know who the Messiah is, and I know who the Messiah is not. Messiah was not Bar Kokhba. The Messiah is not Jesus Christ. Messiah is Dode David. You can bring it up with God to find out why he decided to ask me to serve as Dode's herald, to be the lesser luminary, to Dode as the greater luminary, to serve as the King's Bashar herald, to perform this role as a restoring witness, to be the one named Yada to bring all of this to you. But what I can tell you is that he reached out to me and asked me to do this 24 years ago. It was on a Towrah immediately after 9/11 that I was asked to do so, and that we have worked together collaboratively every waking hour, essentially 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, for a total of 24 years. That's well over 100,000 hours. And the results of what we have done, you can see in the books that sit behind me. There's 25,000 pages of translations from the oldest extant witnesses to Yahweh's testimony, the Dead Sea Scrolls, scrubbed of the diacritical markings so we can wash the text of religiosity, and then amplified in the translations based upon exploring the actionable root of every word and related words so that you might have a comprehensive understanding of the text. And since we have done that, we have discovered upwards of 10,000 profoundly important insights that had never been communicated previously. So we have quite a credential that proves our authorization to do this very thing. And Yahweh has been very keen on pronouncing his authorization for our work together. Now, don't think for a moment that this is something that I came up with, or that something that I'm have competed for, or that is something that you should covet. None of those things are true. I was delighted to work anonymously, which I did for the first 10 years of this endeavor, until it became impossible to do so because Yahweh made it impossible to do so. I wanted to continue to be anonymous. Yahweh did not want me to be anonymous. And so if you don't like this decision, take it up with him. He's the one that made it. The second is that the reason that Yahowah has chosen to declare this relationship, to speak of Yada and to speak of this final restoring witness to the testimony, is that he wants his people to listen. He knows that this is an impossible job. And this is why I said you should not want to covet it. When you look at the most effective people in Yahowah's circle, starting with Moshe, who revealed the Torah, he gave up on the job many times. And in one place, he asked God to kill him. He said, this job cannot be done. These people are way too belligerent, way too embittered. They don't listen. They are ornery. They're irascible. No one can lead them. You gave me a job that is impossible. I want out, and I'd prefer it that you just kill me. So, this is not a job that you should take thinking that it comes with any prestige. No, it comes with a frontal assault by everybody who is religious. And I've had many thousands of death threats and been called every manner of demon. And so it is not something that you should ascribe to. The very moment you come out of anonymity and you announce that God has called you out for this particular role, you become a target. So don't covet this. And oh, by the way, the job ends with the corporeal manifestation of Satan, this Antichrist figure. He bludgeons me to death on the Temple Mount. So you should not be envious of this job. And the fact is that I was given the job because no one else wanted it. I'm sure that Yahowah had other reasons, but the fact is that I didn't compete with anyone. I was the only one that was willing to take it. All right, so as the final witness to the internal testimony regarding the restoring appointments of the Moed, he will literally and without hesitation or interruption convey the way to receive the benefits of the relationship in the distant future during the last days on behalf of the indignant remnant. Well, this carries a lot of information with it, and one of the power-packed pieces is that Yahowah told us in the fourth day of creation that the greater and lesser luminaries would serve as signs for these Moed. These are the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony that are meetings between humankind and God. There are 7 of them. And he said that the greater and lesser luminaries would serve as signs to help us understand these things. And he went on to a considerable degree to explain this role between the lesser and the greater luminary. And in fact, the lesser luminary reflects the greater luminary's light. Now, Yahowah will tell us explicitly that Dod is the greater luminary. He tells us in the 89th Mizmor that Dod is returning as brilliant as the sun. And he then talks about the ongoing relationship in the next breath with the moon serving to reflect his brilliance. And so we have an ongoing relationship. And so we began there, and he stayed on script all the way through to the very end with Malachi, speaking of the role that the two of us would play together. We are the greater and lesser luminary, and we are the ones who are fulfilling the Moed, just as the prophecy on the fourth day of creation speaks. Dod fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim in 33 CE. He was the one who was actually crucified, that Paul counterfeited to create the illusion of a Jesus. And it is my responsibility to cultivate the harvest of Shabuah, which occurs in two phases. There's a May 22nd, 2026, and a June 11th, 2027 phase of Shabuah. The first is likely the imposition of the two-state solution that makes Israel so vulnerable, and that begins the time of Yaakov's troubles. And the second is likely the time of the harvest of Shabuah in 2027. So these are the responsibility in the upcoming Moed. And then, of course, when we get to Towrah, it is my sacrifice on Towrah as the Adam of Parah that makes it possible for the returning and restored remnant of the children of Israel who have been gathered in Jerusalem to witness the homecoming of Dod and Yahowah, so they can enter the millennial Shabat in conditions that are returned to the state that they were in during Eden. So that is why this person is a witness to the Moed. It's the same story that was told all the way back in Bereshith, the Genesis. And the message is God wants you to know how to receive the benefits of the relationship, Asher. And all of this is transpiring in the very distant future of Daniel, who was writing this down, but not so distant in our future, 8 years from now, during the last days. And it will be before an indignant remnant. Israel hasn't changed since the Exodus. They are as belligerent and as embittered, as cantankerous and ornery as they were 3,400 years ago. God gave up on them. Moshe gave up on them. God actually went and divorced himself of them and said that he's only going to return to Israel and to Yehudim when they return to him. And that's going to begin when they embrace his name, and we're not seeing much change in that regard. And so until that changes and until they accept that Dod is their returning Messiah and King and start attending the Moed Mikre as they were intended, as well as accept the terms and conditions of the covenant, they're going to remain at odds against one another. So logically, the voice calling out and announcing Dod's sacrifice and his glorious return recognizes that the most qualified prophet to explain who is going to do what to whom and why, even when, is the one who has been assigned the responsibility of serving and saving Israel in this way. So Yada is now asking Dod, and Yada is also called Makael in this series of prophecies. And he asked Dod, who is referred to here as Gabriel, to bien la halatz eth ha mareh, to provide the insights and connections needed to understand this revelation. After all, the answers are found throughout Dod's Mizmor, his Psalms, many of which pertain to his return during the last days. In the Mizmor, we discovered that the third coming of Dod will be as Elyon. Now, Elyon is typically translated as Almighty God, but it's El, which is God, it's and On, which means all things pertaining to. So all things pertaining to God, but it has that yod in the middle of it, and the yod is drawn with a arm coming down, a forearm reaching out, and an open hand. It symbolizes the hand of God. And we've been talking about the 89th Mizmor in the Appalling Twistianity program in the Rainbow Studio, and you know that Yahowah specifically said that Dod serves as his hand. And so Elyon really means all things pertaining to the hand of God. And he's going to be as brilliant as the sun. Therefore, as the king of Israel approached, Daniel did a faceplant. In other words, ba'ath. He was overwhelmed. And so to preclude this from happening to you, when time permits, prepare for his arrival, please, by reading Coming Home, Volume 1, 2, 3, and I'll soon have Volume 4 posted. You need to be up to speed with Yahowah, with the covenant, with the Moed Mikre, with God's timeline, and especially with Dod. Otherwise, everything's just going to be overwhelming at that point. Now, speaking to us, the Messiah, Dode said, children of Adam, you should choose to use your ability to make the necessary connections so that you understand. Learning how to closely examine and carefully consider the evidence while being discerning. Being my favorite Hebrew verb. It means literally to make the connections between the things you've come to know so that you can go from general awareness to comprehension. It is to find the common denominator between things, to use probability and reason to assess a cause and effect. So nothing really is more enriching, nothing is more empowering, more enlightening. Knowledge to know, to Yada, is infinitely superior to faith. That's why when somebody says, what do you believe? I don't believe anything. I either know or I don't know. And knowing is infinitely superior to believing. But understanding is infinitely superior to knowing. Bien is the essence of understanding. So our shepherd reminds us that this prophetic revelation for the end of time is for our time, and it was not for Daniel's time, which may be why he fell asleep in the middle of Dode's declaration. It was not for him to know, but it is for us, which is why this is the first accurate explanation of Daniel ever presented. Then he said, pay close attention to me and behold who I am. Yada, as the final witness to the eternal testimony regarding the restoring appointments of the final Moed, will make this known to you so that it will be understood. And he will literally and consistently convey the way to receive the benefits of this relationship, doing so in the distant future during the last days on behalf of the indignant remnant. Well, that's an interesting twist and prophecy. So Dode David, our Messiah and King, is saying that he wants us to pay close attention to him, and then he switches to Yada. Well, the very fact is that Yada has written now 4 volumes on coming home, which present Dode's Mizmor. That is the focus of them. They also speak of Dode's role as the Messiah, Dode's role as the Son of God, and my role relative to reflecting Dode's brilliance. And there are 3 volumes currently available at YAHOWAH.com, all free. And you can, we'll be able to access the 4th one here shortly. So this is what he is speaking of. Yahweh specifically says in the 89th Mizmor that he is going to hold all people accountable for knowing what Dode said and responding to it, knowing what Dode did and acting upon it. Now it's a big statement. He doesn't say that of Moshe and the Torah. He says that of Dode David, that when your soul, it's the time for it to learn its fate. The criterion is, did you listen to Dode? Are you aware of what he achieved? And have you capitalized upon it? And the reason for that is Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. It's the only way to add any time to your life. He opened the doorway to life on Passover by fulfilling it with his corporeal body serving as the lamb. And he took our religious and political guilt and deposited them and all of it in Sheol, a black hole, on Matzah, right on the schedule that he provided 600 years in advance to give the exact day, such that it would never be seen again, making us look not guilty before God. And then his soul Nephesh, returned to Yahweh in Shamaim, declaring that he indeed was the firstborn, Bakor, of Bakurim, firstborn children. And so it is Dod's fulfillment of the first three Moed Mikre that opened the door to God's home, to eternal life, to provide this threshold of perfection, if you will, so that we can be part of God's family. And so he says, you better pay close attention to me, and behold who I am. Don't replace him with a fake Messiah like Jesus, a false son of God like Jesus. Know who Dod is. He's God's son. He is the Messiah. Now, he is not God. He is God's right hand. Then he transitions immediately to Yada. And with Yada, it's interesting that he's not only tying Yada again with the final Moed, he is saying that he is going to communicate with you about the benefits of the relationship, doing so in the distant future, in the last days. So here's a guy that he's talking about that's in his company in 600-ish, 550-ish BCE in Babylon, about the role that he's going to play 2,600, 2,500 years later. Pretty extraordinary. But, time is fungible to God. He can maneuver in time. He can take a soul back in time, forward in time. He can bring a soul that has previously lived and have that soul reappear. He can take a soul that is going to be born long into the future and bring that soul back in time. God is not stuck in time the way we are. He is an energy-based spiritual being, and on a photon of light, all time simply exists, so that a being that is equivalent to energy, particularly one in the seventh dimension, can maneuver and see our future in our past and take souls back and forth as he sees fit to fulfill roles that are important for him and for his people. So Yada is this witness to the final restoring appointments of the final Moed. Shabuah and Towrah are in particular his to fulfill. But he also plays a role on Kippurim, because as the bull, it's his blood that is put on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant by Dod to fulfill the promise of reconciliations. And that day he is going to be at the right hand of Dod, our king, serving as the best man for the wedding of the adulterous woman that he has purged through his sacrifice as the Adam of Parah. And even going through the next Moed Mikre to be fulfilled, the one 5 days after Yom Kippurim, on the 7th of October of 2033, this fellow Yada has the responsibility, even in that Moed, that one's going to be fulfilled not only in the first 7 days and then the eighth day, and then for 1,000 years. He is the responsibility of serving Dod. He is Dod's herald, his brother, if you will, prince to the king in this regard. And so he does have a role along with Dod during those final fulfillments of the Moedim. So the more we are attuned to Gabriel, God's most confident and capable, courageous and confrontational leader, the more we will be like him. And by following Dod's footsteps, we will live the most productive lives possible. We'll please our God. We will endure forever at his side. It's worth the effort. When we listen to Dod, we will bask in his brilliance, and we're going to earn his respect. And that's a noble idea, especially since he is our Savior and he will be our King. Now, should you be curious, other than Daniel 8 and 9, there is no mention of Gabriel anywhere else in the Torah, not in the prophets, not in the Psalms. The only other Hebrew book to speak of him is Enoch, where he plays a starring role alongside Michael or Michael, Unfortunately for the myth, Enoch is about as credible as Harry Potter and Bilbo Baggins. So it doesn't help much, does it? And it presents him as a spiritual being, as an angel, if you will, as opposed to his true identity, and that is of an exceptional man. Also, since Gabriel is addressing the Gabor of El, it is worth noting that he makes an appearance in Ezekiel. Upon Satan's arrival in Jerusalem, as in the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan, which will be through Donald Trump, the Gabor and his two witnesses are featured on the menu. And they are served during the Lord's Feast of the Beast. The celebrants will be dining on their flesh and their blood. But this is ultimately going to metastasize into the sacrifice of the Adam of Perah on Towrah and be a very good thing. Now, since the erroneous projections of the titles Christ and Christian were derived from a misappropriation of Daniel 9, we should not be surprised that the angel named Gabriel is said to have conveyed blessings upon the mythical Mary. I just laugh every time I read Mary. Christians want Mary to be the mother of Jesus. And in Roman Catholicism, she's the mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, and the Madonna and Child, to whom they seek blessings, a virgin on top of all of that. The fact of the matter is that Mary is from Miriam, and it is the worst possible name for a woman. It means to be embittered, to betray, to be obnoxious. The person named Miriam was Moshe's sister. And she is famous for having come to Moshe, beginning by besmirching his wife, which was just reprehensible. And then she said that she too spoke for God. And this is like Roman Catholics ascribing mythical Mary with special powers so that she can speak for the souls of people dead and alive. Well, she claimed the same thing, and God responded. And God was so angry at what she said, her claim, that God struck her with leprosy and said, it's as if your father spit in your face. And then he separated her from the community. And then he chastised her for her claim. And then he corrected her and said, no, if you're speaking for me, you know it because I've said it. And I proved it. And then on top of all of that, in the last mention of Miriam, we're told in Debadim that she is the exemplar of being divorced and therefore eternally separated from God. So there is no name they could have picked that would have been worse than Mary. And by the way, the whole myth of Mary is based upon Asherah and Astarte, the basis of Easter from Babylon. She is the Queen of Heaven and the Mother of God that Yahowah besmirches throughout the Torah and prophets. But even worse than that, since Eliah is coming back as one of the two witnesses, you may want to check and see what he has to say about Asherah, which is the basis of the myth of Mary, the Mother of God and the Queen of Heaven, and how he not only debated the prophets of Asherah, the forerunner of Mary, that he then killed them all. So, if you're expecting Eliah to come back, Elijah, as your great witness, it's just like Jews, you're going to be really, really disappointed because the first thing he's going to do is condemn everyone who is religious. So anyway, this fanciful notion of Mary and blessings that were bequeathed by an angelic version of Gabriel is responsible for the fables of the virgin birth, of a baby God being born, of Christmas, of visiting wise men from Babylon. and devotion to the Mother God and the Queen of Heaven. We had a breakaway cult that is a Mother Goddess cult, and they're still fixated on speaking for Mommy Dearest. It is a age-old ploy because women are particularly drawn to this notion of a woman speaking for them, a woman protecting them, a woman caring for them. And so you've never had a major religion that has managed to prevail with a large group of people unless it has some feminine aspect of a mother goddess. And Asherah, Astarte, is that woman, and it is Mary that made Christianity palpable and possible in terms of its broad dissemination. And it is this mother goddess thing that has caused so many former contributors to the covenant to go off the deep end and destroy their souls in the process. So it's a very common and seductive myth that has claimed many, including a couple of billion Christians today. Now, in speaking of myths, Luke took the bait and he ran with it, having Gabriel meet with Zechariah, who was allegedly the father of imaginary John the Baptist, in addition to the Virgin Mary. And he was just another desperate attempt to turn Jesus into the Christian God. The entire episode is recorded in the first chapter of Luke, and it has less credibility than anything written in the Odyssey. And while that is incriminating for Christianity, the problem is considerably worse for Islam. In order to elicit some pretense of credibility for what is clearly the worst book ever written, Muhammad would claim that it was dictated in its entirety by Gabriel. Whoops, that was stupid. Mormons, the laughingstock of Christendom, claim that Gabriel and Noah were one and the same. And God, it's so obvious that he's dead, and people just don't think. And that he was a prophet in addition to a seafaring captain. Worse, Michael, whom Joseph Smith often confused with Adam, allegedly met with him, teaching him Adam and Eve about the spurious Jesus Christ during their days in the garden, even baptizing them, one of the dumbest religions in the history of humankind. Though they should have known better, the rabbis have a Gabriel problem too. He is a prominent player as an archangel throughout Kabbalah literature, which is likely why he was introduced to Christianity and promoted throughout those myths, and then makes his appearance in the Quran. The association of Gabriel with Dode is obvious, and since Gabor is directly related and defined similarly to Gabor, all one has to do is verify the connection to Dode is to read an accurate translation of Yeshaya, Isaiah 9, where the son who is given is clearly a Gabor, and that son is named in that prophecy, and his name ain't Jesus. His name is Dode and David. As we move further into this prophecy, we learn more about the identity of the ram and the goat, as well as the respective horns, these bonehead blowhards, if you will, of politics. And while that's important in that it reveals the evolution of evil, so long as we capitalize upon what we have just observed, the wiles of man will be kept at bay. Now, much of what has been shared occurred long ago, including the horrible history of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And yet, it will be reprised, tormenting the world once again during the last days. And that makes everything we have learned about these beasts relevant. The story is poised to repeat itself. It is no doubt why Donald Dumpster was told to declare his supposed divinity on the, or will be anyway, on the Ides of March, to tie in his claims with the claims of Julius Caesar from long ago. Ides of March 15th is not only the most pivotal date in Roman mythology, and all tied to Bacchus, who is Dionysus, and Astarte, and the mother goddess cult that became Easter week, but also to the transition from the Republic of Rome to Imperial Rome and to the death of Rome. And of course, the next emperor would claim to be a god. So with an eye to the past, to envision our future, we read the following, and this is now from Daniel 8:20. The ram, this leader of the flock, this dominant ruler from El, male lamb, upright pillar, doorpost, and leader, even formidable tree, which you saw acting like a lord while possessing the two horns, are the kings of Media, and Paras, Persia. Daniel 8:20. So before we reflect on the Median and Persian history, keep in mind that this prophecy was witnessed by Daniel in 553 BCE, and he saw it in Babylon. The Assyrians had been conquered by his captors 57 years prior to this date, which is why that former superpower was not included in this prophecy, because that would have been history. Now, as for the Medes, their kingdom was born out of the Assyrian defeat. And at this time, they were still a formidable influence within the region. However, within 5 years, Persia would conquer Media, and within 16 years, they would control Babylon. After the fall of the Assyrian Empire between 616 and 609 BCE, the first Median state was formed. Along with Babylonia and Lydia, Media briefly became a power broker within the confines of Mesopotamia, the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. It grew by annexing considerable territory, much of it coming as a result of the capture of Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. As is often the case, Media couldn't handle prosperity. The kingdom was conquered in 550 BCE by Cyrus, who we know as the Great, establishing the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Interesting, however, during their brief flirtation with fame and fortune, the Medes, like the Roman legions nearly a millennium later, marched to the tune of Mithras. And Mithras was the unconquerable sun. The Mithridian religion has a huge influence in Christianity, and was the religion of Constantine even to his death. It is the sun god religion that gives so much breadth to Christian traditions. So under Cyrus, who reigned from 559 to 530 BCE, the Persians defeated Lydia in 547 and then Babylonia in 539. After moving his capital to the city of Babylon, Cyrus expanded his empire to rule over significant portions of the ancient world. And by 500, BCE, and following the conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE, the Persian Empire stretched from the Indus Valley, running through today's India, Pakistan, and China, to Thrace, comprised of portions of today's Bulgaria, northwestern Turkey, and even northeastern Greece. And from Macedonia in the west, which was at the time stretched from the Adriatic to the Aegean, and across the Balkans to Libya, Greece, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and all of Turkey along the Mediterranean Sea. So Cyrus controlled all of today's present-day Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, the northern rim of Arabia, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, as well as much of the Caucasus region around the Caspian Sea. Persians ruled over 2 million square miles and 40 million people. Nearly half of the world's population at the time. Isn't that amazing? 40 million people was half of the world's population at the time of Cyrus. Have population numbers soared from what would have been 80 million total people at the time to 8 billion. Stunning, huh? Persia would be noted for its antagonism toward the Greek city-states, its emancipation of Jewish slaves from Babylon, and its insistence on an official language. In this case, it was Aramaic. As we have learned, Persia was ultimately defeated by Alexander the Great following the Macedons' invasion in 334 BCE, but this is 200 years later. The kingdom, which was then under the dominion of Darius III, was divided into the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucid Empire following Alexander's death. Actually divided into lots of little tiny slices, but ultimately those became the two major ones. As was the case with Rome incorporating Greek philosophy, architecture, and religion after conquering them, Babylonia would leave its imprint on Persia. The Persians absorbed a host of Babylonian customs, similar to the way the Persians later inspired the Greeks. And surely as Babylon was born anew in Persia, the Persian culture spread throughout Greece. Greece affected Rome, just as Rome evolved into the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity. Remember that this prophecy was revealed 200 years before these events transpired. So we find Yahweh identifying the goat as Greece. And to tell that story, we must begin with the rise of Alexander the Great and around 356 to 323 BCE. But at the time, of course, that this was revealed around 550, Greece didn't even exist. And the young and independent crowned goat, the shaggy-haired, tempestuous, and devilish male, is the king of Ionian Greece. Ioan means to imbibe wine. It is transliterated as Ionian and thus as Greece. The Ionian was the primary name for Greece for many, many centuries. And of course, they were most famous for imbibing on wine. They made a living transporting, selling, growing, and drinking wine. The Assyrians referred to the Greeks as Ioannou, from which we get Ionians. Similarly, the Egyptians called Greece Yaoni. Greece was known to the Greeks as Ion. And so this is the name that they all used. Ion is very similar to the pronunciation that we were just given in the book of Daniel. Javan is also the grandson of Noah, through Yephesh, and as such, he is initially listed in Bereshith, Genesis 10:2. He is presented among some of the rather tawdry characters, including Gomer, Magog, Madai, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. These are characters that are then used to convey some of the false prophecy in the book of Ezekiel. There is no Magog, there is no Gog, there is no really Meshach and Tubal in that sense. There will not be a war of Armageddon. There will not be a Magog war. All of it is nonsense, as is the Valley of the Dry Bones. Ezekiel said many things that have considerable merit because he spoke for Satan, and he lays out Satan's desires. And it is by reading that book that you come to know the adversary exceedingly well and what he intends to do in the last days. He's the one who reveals that the real estate magnate that will be the one who measures out and gloats over the construction of a monstrous building, a monstrosity, if you will, that will be larger than the Temple Mount, larger than all of Jerusalem, that he'll have naming rights to, that this builder, this man who is known for his construction projects, he said, would be copper colored. And of course, he is speaking of Donald Trump. So there are lots of insights that are worth knowing. So YAHOWAH is also associated with Greece and Yeshaya, Isaiah 66:19. At the conclusion of the final chapter of the great prophet, YAHOWAH says that it is among the defiant nations which have remained unaware of his name and renown. And so history will end poorly for the Christians in Greece. And this makes total sense because Greece remains a most Christian of nations, and therefore they are anti-Semitic. The Christian New Testament demonizes Jews, and they are one of the nations leading the largest protests in favor of annihilating Israel by Free Palestine. So this is not a country that's going to fare well in the next 8 years. In Zechariah 9, YAHOWAH is shown in direct opposition to YAHOWAH, Greece. In context, the arrogant bastard children parade around as if they were Palestinians, try to rob Jews of their inheritance, and they're going to be uprooted. This bloody abomination will be removed so that YAHOWAH can camp out with his son Dod in their home. And yes, descendants of Zion and Jerusalem, rejoice, because your oppression and your oppressors are gone, and your rightful king is returning as your savior. And at this time, Yehudah and Ephraim will rise up against the descendants of YAHOWAH, Greece, and they will defeat them with the sword of the Gibor, the mighty man that is Dod. The ultimate demise of Greece is important to YAHOWAH because of the role the Greeks within Roman Byzantium played in the transition from the most tyrannical and destructive empire to the most anti-Semitic and damning religion. It is comprised and reprised for replacement theology, if you will. There are very few things that are as hostile to Jews and to God's people than the rise of the Byzantines and of the Eastern Roman Empire, of Constantine, of Theodosius, and the caste system they imposed, with Jews being at the bottom of that caste, worse than slaves. It is a despicable thing that they did, and it was during the rise of Constantine when his publicist Eusebius in Constantinople in the Greek realm that Christianity was conceived, that Christianity was actually built into a religion, that the text that we call the Christian New Testament was compiled and augmented during that time. And Jews were always demeaned and humiliated And so God has the score to settle with them. And then, of course, the basis of Jesus, other than the parts that were stolen from Dode, come from Dionysus, the Greek god who died each year during the vernal equinox and would rise on the Sunday nearest that equinox. So now addressing the death of Alexander and how that led not to succession, but instead to infighting among the generals who had served under him, we find another reference to this controversial man's death. It reads, "The great horn, which is positioned between its eyes, was the initial and foremost." Let me begin that again. "The great horn, which is positioned between its eyes, was the initial and foremost king, who suffered and died by rupturing of internal membranes." This comes from YAHOWAH, who was afflicted, broken, and shattered, suffering physically while ceasing to exist. The same three letters can be vocalized shaber, which means crippling injury, which destroys human tissues, creating fissures by fracturing and disfiguring and breaking them apart. I'll explain why that's important in a moment. "And then 4 arose and appointed themselves in his place. 4 empires will be appointed from this goy, but not with his authorization or power." Daniel 8:22. Boy, that is very, very specific. And it is exactly what would happen 200 years after this was revealed. And right down to the subtle details which describe the cause of Alexander's death, or the fact that there were 4 generals who were all afforded fiefdoms out of Alexander's conquests, but Alexander himself had never authorized any of them. So the empire was divided, and again, without his authorization, into 4 kingdoms. Each was comprised of people from many different races and places, and all were dictatorially ruled by men who had served under this goat. The young man who was educated by Aristotle at 12, who first led troops into battle at 16, who ascended to the throne at 20 after his father's assassination, died in Babylon at 32 years of age, following a drunken stupor. And in the process of conquering Persia, he had forged an empire from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to the border of India. It was the largest in the world. While he never lost a battle, he lost control of himself and his army. They mutinied because they were repulsed that he had adopted Persian customs, just as the prophets had proclaimed. And he was pretending to be a god, and that he held human life in such low regard. And perhaps he lost in the mythos of his own claims to divinities, such that he so lost in them that he thought he could cheat death. And he failed to designate a successor. So within a year of his demise, his empire was shattered into 4 pieces. And then much infighting after that. The events leading to Alexander's death are shrouded in mystery, but nonetheless, there are some clues available for our consideration. We know that in February 324 BCE, Alexander faced a mutiny at the Ganges River. He responded by ordering his men to march through the desert toward Babylon. After crossing the Tigris River, the Macedonian was met by Babylonian priests who advised him not to enter the city directly because their deity, Bel, the Lord, had warned them that to do so would be fatal. And the Babylonian clerics also advised him against continuing to march westward, because by doing so, he would have to look at the setting sun, which is indication of a god's supposed demise. As a result, the Lord's priests manipulated the goat Alexander into circumnavigating the city and entering Babylon via the royal gate, which was in the western wall, where he would be facing east. Following this clerical advice, likely killed Alexander. The religious route required navigating swampy terrain, where it is probable that Alexander contracted malaria, and if not that, then typhoid fever, both of which were common in the swamps surrounding Babylon. The evidence suggests that several weeks prior to his death, Alexander contracted a deadly pathogen, sailing through the stagnant and unsanitary waters, which were rife with human waste and were breeding grounds for disease. According to a University of Maryland School of Medicine research article published in 1998, Alexander likely died of typhoid fever, was their conclusion, along with malaria, was the leading cause of death in ancient Babylon. And the week before his demise, historical accounts mention chills, sweats, exhaustion, high fever, which are all typical symptoms of both infectious disease, typhoid and malaria. The medical center's report states that Alexander suffered severe abdominal pain, causing him to cry out in agony. Now, the reason that this is interesting is because both diseases affect the specific symptoms depicted in by Shabat, this injury by membranes rupturing and breaking apart. And since breaking and rupturing is a strange way to depict a man's death, and especially one who had never lost a battle and who was at the height of his power, an investigation into why Shabat was chosen to describe his passing is intriguing, since he would have contracted this deadly pathogen by following the council of clerics promoting the Babylonian religion. Now, malaria is a mosquito-borne disease and thus common to wet environments, where it is found where mosquitoes breed in stagnant water. Spirochetes in the saliva of the female mosquitoes enter the circulatory system and they travel to the victim's liver, which is where they reproduce. After a brief dormant period, cells begin to burst. Ruptured host cells literally break out of the liver to invade the victim's red blood cells. While a person's spleen is designed to destroy such infections, in the case of malaria, the parasite circumvents the immune system through adhesive proteins. The body is ravaged, with the bitten individual suffering excruciating physical pain, especially in the joints. And fever is so high, it tricks the body into thinking it's cold, prompting shivering convulsions, which all too often lead to coma and death. I know this all too well because I contracted this disease attempting to study the Falasha, which are African Jews in Gondor, Ethiopia. They had claimed to have found and pirated away the Ark of the Covenant, and while that proved false, I can attest that the joint pain and the freezing fever from malaria were so debilitating, my body contorted into the fetal position. I was unable to move for days, even to speak. I was in such agony, I wasn't sure if I wanted to live or die. Now, typhoid, on the other hand, is transmitted by the ingestion of water or food contaminated with Salmonella typhi bacteria. Untreated, the fever follows 4 stages to death. In the first week, the body temperature rises slowly. The victim is drained of energy, suffers excruciating headaches, and can develop an annoying cough. The white blood cells diminish, further exhausting the individual. In the second week, the fever rises, often peaking at around 104 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by an agitated delirium that could easily be mistaken for a drunken stupor. Especially nauseous smelling, pea soup green diarrhea follows, emancipating the victim further. In the final phase, the intestines literally burst, causing internal hemorrhaging and poisoning. The internal breaking apart of the digestive system leads to dehydration, toxicity, and death in the fourth stage. So with these depictions in mind, and I didn't mean to get all too graphic with you, but it's the precision of the prophecy is worth this trip down medical lane because of the use of shabar. That's injury caused by membranes rupturing and breaking apart, to describe the death of Alexander. And it is telling because just as Christianity is rife with Babylonian influences, it was this priestly advice which led to the goat's demise. He died prematurely because those serving the Lord, Baal, and Babylonia, in the Babylonian religion, gave him deadly counsel. Rather than walking away from Babylon as Yahweh requires of his children so that they might live, this arrogant man walked right into Babylon and he died. And in this way, the Greek Alexander, like the Roman Paul, serves as a prototype for the beastly horn who will rise to lead mankind away from the Torah and its final exodus from Babylon, but instead back to Babylon, which is the birthplace of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Yes, Judaism was born in Babylon with the Babylonian Talmud. And the Quran was first written in Babylon, and the source of that Quran is the Jewish Babylonian Talmud. And of course, in Christianity, virtually every aspect of the religion is a derivative of the Babylonian religion from long ago. So this axis of evil is advanced in God's next statement. But as we consider what follows, it is important to note that Ba'akareth is most accurately translated as in the end, although it can also be rendered as afterward. The primary connotation would take us to our future with the Christian church falling under the dominion of the Towrahless one. The second definition would take us to 197 BCE, when the legions of the Roman Republic under General Flavius defeated Philip V of Macedon. Also intriguing, rather than stating that the four kingdoms claimed by Alexander's generals would end, Maluk him, their empire is singular, while him is plural. Further, Ha-Pasha, the rebellious and defiant ones, is plural, while the verb Ahmad, he will present himself, was written in the third person masculine singular. The resulting Melech, leader, is also singular. Now, considering these factors and what follows, we should be cognizant and realize that the transition among the beasts from Imperial Rome to Roman Catholicism occurred in Constantinople. Further, the church's authority will be usurped in the end by the final horn. And representing Satan and himself, he will manifest the duality that we find in this title. And we'll conclude our program with a review of this next statement. Then in the end, their empire of the rebellious and defiant ones will be finished. The authorized embodiment of political, religious, and military power will arise, and he will present himself with a fortified and empowered presence and face. Then one will come to understand riddles and enigmas, asking hard questions needed to solve the most challenging of mysteries and intriguing analogies. Daniel 8:23. So we'll leave, having claimed that we have resolved these riddles, enigmas, and analogies. We will conclude this program at this point, and we will return to solve ever more of them when we resume our series here on the Antichrist from the YAHOWah blog and our library studio tomorrow. Thank you for listening.